Hi, this is Black Krishna, or BK, from manforwars.com, where I'm promoting polite patriotism to help nice ladies and gents teach kids to be, look, talk, and feel great, and locally discuss and share great online info offline as better people making better places to live worldwide. So check out manforwars.com for more on that. But this video is called China Runs Hollywood. Learn and pass it on to save your neighbors from the new Nazis. China runs Hollywood. Learn and pass it on to save your neighbors from the new Nazis. So, a lot of controversy these days with the NBA, National Basketball Association General Manager Daryl Morey tweeting his support for Hong Kong protesters, then getting a tremendous amount of pushback. Daryl Morey, the Houston Rockets basketball team, the NBA apologizing, and the 30-year relationship of the NBA in China is now being threatened because of a simple tweet by an American in favor of the Hong Kong protesters trying to fight to preserve their agreed-upon freedom when it comes to the deal Hong Kong had with mainland China. And then all the blowback, where the Chinese government is going, this is crazy, how dare you interfere in our country. And now there's a big controversy there when it comes to we're in the West, we support freedom of speech, individual rights. We're against, evil dictatorships and human rights abuses and so on. But there's a lot of money to be made in China, and if you want to, make money in China, then you got to do what they say, and they are a human rights abusing dictatorship that's against freedom of speech and so on. So. There's a bit of a disconnect there, obviously, and it's causing some controversy. And basically, it's important for us to know, what is happening, basically, when it comes to China. Now, the bottom line is this. The super rich people, the New World Order, globalists, so on, they want a global one world government run by the UN and other international groups. That's globalism. Then there are nationalists that try and fight for their country, their culture, borders, economy, and so on, to try and preserve them against global control. So globalists want centralized control over the world. Nationalists want individual countries controlling their own destinies and then freely trading with each other in sort of bilateral trade agreements, right? So, and then when it comes to China, China was actually built by the globalists, right? They went from emperor to communism, and that communism was funded by the West. Lots of roots of Marx when it comes to England and so on, right? So they had the communist revolution, and then in the late 70s, after communism had screwed up their country and killed tens of millions of people for years, the United Nations and George Herbert Walker Bush, when he was with the CIA and then with the State Department in the U.S., basically the UN, the U.S., and the Brits went over to China and went, oh my God, look at this. People are starving. This is crazy. Here's what you got to do. The UN is going to work with you to build China back up after communism screwed you up, right? And so the UN, they came up with the one-child policies, the merger of communism and capitalism, and they basically designed China to be the new global role model for the world, and to be the dominant player in the world, and the whole world to be shaped in China's image, right? And China is supposed to replace the United States as the global role model. So the U.S., never perfect, certainly some bad actors, bad leaders, and so on, doing some bad things, but they also did a lot of good things, and the ideals of freedom and prosperity and so on, those are what the world aspired to. So around the world, everyone looked to America to say, we want to be like America. We want to be able to succeed. Everybody has a chance to make it. You can have a big house and a big car and blue jeans and rock and roll. That's the vision. The best of America is what the rest of the world was aiming for to achieve in their countries. And so the globalists want to replace that with China and say, look up to China. China's successful. China does this. China does that. And and yes, they have no free speech. Yes, they have concentration camps with millions of people being re-educated, raped, tortured, murdered, and so on. Yes, they've got live organ transplants. Yes, they've got massive censorship and social credit scores, but they are the role model. So moving forward, China is supposed to be what everyone sort of appeals to as the global standard, right? So I bring that up to say, well, what's up with China? Is it just Chinese people doing what Chinese people do? No, it's a bigger picture. And in the 1990s, early 1990s, China was let into the World Trade Organization, despite the fact that they were a repressive communist dictatorship and so on. They were like, you know what? We should let them in, give them most favored nation, developing nation status, and build them up. And through that process of trade and communicating with the West, they will naturally see the error of communism, and they will give up on it. They'll become more open to democracy, to freedom, to individual liberty, and so on, right? So that was the plan. And, excuse me, that was the plan. Now, instead, what ended up happening is China was basically supported. Communist China was supported by the West, by Western investment, by the fact that the West didn't see their slave labor camps and say, stop it. They saw their slave labor camps and said, hey, if you use slave labor camps, we can produce our goods cheaper. And so, great, fantastic. So, while it's sold to us as we want an open, prosperous, liberal, free China, in fact, the opposite happened, and the West reinforced the strength of the Communist Party dictatorship there. And basically, as part of their plan, was we in the West, in America, Canada, Europe, and so on, and the rest of the world to some degree, we were going to send them a bunch of dollars, a bunch of paper money, to buy cheap stuff. We'll buy our phones cheaper there, toys, clothes, whatever, right? But then they are going to use all that paper we sent them, American dollars, Canadian dollars, euros, British pounds, Australian dollars, whatever. They are going to use that money that we sent them to buy us. So that's basically what the plan is. We make China rich, we send them tons of cash for cheap stuff, and then we buy it here locally, sold by our corporations. They bring that money over, same cash, Canadian dollars are accepted in Canada, American dollars accepted in America, and so on around the world, to buy us. So they take major investments in industries, major investments in real estate, major investments in propaganda and brainwashing with their Confucius Institutes in universities across America and around the world, which are basically Chinese institutes that are supposedly for Chinese students, no problem there, except they've got a connection with the Chinese government, which means they reflect Chinese government propaganda and thinking, and they push it out there. Plus, they have possible intelligence assets at these institutes, compromising different universities and different parts of countries around the world. So, so that's a nutshell when it comes to China, right? And when it comes to their control over Hollywood, I'd like to take it to an article from Breitbart News, one of the best news sites out there, dealing with politics and pop culture. And as late great Andrew Breitbart said, politics is downstream from pop culture. So once the pop culture brainwashes us, they put in policies that say, okay, these are now the laws. And so you might be like, what? Where'd all this anybody can use any bathroom stuff come from? It's like, you couldn't just make a law saying that, we'd rebel. Well, they beat us around the head, and now you can have, giant guys dressed in drag going into little girls' change rooms, and if you don't like it, then you're the jerk, right? So how do cultures that would have thought that insane just a few years ago accept it? It's because politics is downstream from pop culture. The pop culture is used to brainwash us and beat us up. And that's also why it's important for people to understand how China runs Hollywood. Because if you don't understand that, then you might take Hollywood seriously. You might take Hollywood seriously when it comes to what they produce as propaganda, when it comes to what their leading celebrities, actors, actresses, producers, writers, directors, and so on are saying. When in fact, now hold on a second, they're not just talented, intelligent people speaking for themselves. They're reflecting their Chinese communist control. So, and this is stuff we've got to resist. And if you can learn more and wake your neighbors, you can resist the communist Chinese controlled Hollywood propaganda and brainwashing that screws you up for bigger political changes down the line, right? It's called predictive programming in some ways, where the establishment puts stuff in fiction, not like news, where you're more locked into, is this BS or not? Whereas with fiction, you kind of let, oh, it's just that world, it's just so on, whatever. And so in Minority Report with Tom Cruise a few years ago, they put in the naked body scanners that take a naked image of your body under your clothes before you pass into certain buildings to make sure that you're not carrying anything bad that could harm people. And it's like, whoa, that's weird. And then a few years later, naked body scanners at the airports. Why isn't there more pushback? Because we were softened up after seeing it in a movie and more passively absorbing it. So, and there's tons and tons of stuff like that, right? How many movie posters have you seen with pictures of crazy or dead or undead, demented, messed up kids, right? Child horror movies, this and that. Oh, The Reckoning, The Becoming. Oh, this little child is so scary. Oh, this little child's messed up. Oh, this evil serial killer is torturing children. It's like, that's all insane. But when it comes to that, plus the, oh, kids these days, kids suck, kids this and that, as opposed to adults going, no, if the kids suck, it's our fault. We are supposed to be responsible for that. All that brainwashing has a toll on people. Or all the movies out there, all the movies, TV shows, podcasts, serials on Netflix, and so on, about murder, right? I used to talk to a good friend of mine about this a lot, because he was into a lot of that stuff. But, because it'd be, well, what do you want to do? Well, let's watch TV. What's on TV? What's on Netflix? CSI Miami, CSI Albuquerque, CSI New York, CSI this, CSI that. Murder, murder, murder. Serial killers, Dexter, serial killer, blah, 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 blah. Why is all of that out there? Well, that's a form of mind control. It's dehumanizing mind control. Now, you talk to somebody, and my buddy's chick was sort of like, it's more girly when it comes to this stuff, as opposed to more, rip into it like a guy would. So she's like, well, that's just life. If you don't like it, don't watch. It's just a TV show. And I was like, like I say in my song No Country for Old Men about her in that instant, it's not just life or don't watch. That's some hardcore mind control to mitigate or squash, right? Intelligent men with intelligent thoughts, smart enough to trade dumb when she plays soft, right? Like, all right, fine. You don't want me to push you on this? Fine. But somebody's got to deal with this crap, right? Because, you could say stuff like that. Or another female friend, was saying, well, at the end, they always catch the bad guy, so it's got a good message. So, yeah, fine. But if for 45 minutes before that last 15-minute denouement, you're watching, bad guy, rape and kill some white girl, chop her up, put her in bags or a suitcase or whatever. And then you're looking at her dead body on the autopsy table. Okay, there's a dead body. Then the forensic scientist is cutting into the dead body, trying to figure out exactly how she was killed. And then you've got flashbacks to the scene and flashbacks to the dead body. And here's a clue. This must be when he bashed her in the head and blood flew over there. All of that for 45 minutes. And then in the end, the last 5, 10, 15 minutes is a nice quick wrap up. They catch the killer. The bad guy's gone. Aren't we good people? Isn't this a good show? That doesn't mitigate the fact that the previous 45 minutes was dehumanizing brainwashing. So if we can learn to reject some of these negative influences, then we'll be much better for it, because we'll be better people, dealing with better people, having better things on our mind, and not having our minds warped by this crap. So, and on that, I'm going to get into this article by John Nolte from Breitbart News. It says here, and John Nolte's a great writer, so if you look up Nolte and look up his stuff, I strongly recommend it. He's also a big fan of Hollywood, big fan of movies, big fan of pop culture, writes about politics and pop culture, And you can tell he's got a real love for it and a real hate for what's being done to it. So he's not somebody that's like, it's all bad, you're a loser. It's like, no, no, no. When they do a good job, Hollywood's awesome. But they often do a bad job, and that causes problems. So anyway, from Breitbart.com, and it says here, Nolte. If you think the NBA sucks up to China, wait till you meet Hollywood. By John Nolte, October 18th, 2019. There you go. And it says here, there was a national uproar over the weekend when the National Basketball Association, or NBA, sided with the monstrous Chinese government over pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong, which is great. But where the hell were these people when Hollywood literally sold its artistic soul to the communist Chinese? So he's saying, oh, all this uproar is nice right now. But where were you when Hollywood was being sold to communist China? Because like I said, they buy a bunch of industries. They also own Hollywood at this point. So everything coming out of Hollywood is generally approved by the Chinese government because it's communist China. They are the ones behind the Chinese investors investing in Hollywood and allowing them to. So it says here, I am baffled over this NBA uproar. You mean people really care about all the terrible human rights abuses committed by the Chi-Coms? Because you could have fooled me. And so he says in his fun colloquial writer style, hey, over here, remember this? Breitbart News is reporting on this going back at least 7 years. Oh, wait, 8 years. And he's got hyperlinks to those articles. You see, the article continues, some of us figured out something was terribly wrong with Hollywood, terribly misguided, terribly illiberal when 2012's Red Dawn remake, which had already been shot, was forced to digitally scrub every reference to the Chinese as the bad guys. Instead of Red China successfully invading a chunk of America, which is at least somewhat plausible, digital magic told us the North Koreans had done it, which is absurd. Yes, the starving, tiny, hapless North Koreans beat the United States Marines. So think about it. Red Dawn was a great movie that came out in the early 1980s about a potential Red China or Red Russia, I forget which one at this time, takeover of America. And it was amazing. It was, oh my goodness, they snuck up on us. They sold out some of America's defenses. All the average Joe and Jane Americans have to get their guns out of their cupboards and try and form militias to defend against the literal physical takeover of America, right? And so that was in the early 1980s. And then in 2012, when they try and remake it, and they logically pick China, because China's second, third biggest military in the world after the U.S., it's either going to be Russia or China. That's a real threat. They have to switch it to North Korea, a small, impoverished, vassal state of China that's controlled by China, with their leader Kim Jong-un, barely managing to run this tiny little slave colony of North Koreans. And yeah, it's shocking. I mean, it doesn't make any sense for a movie to list them as a major. It's like saying the Bahamas invaded the U.S. It's like, well, the Bahamians took over. Yo, it's better in the Bahamas, and now we are going to take over the U.S. It's like it doesn't make any sense, right? But because of the Chinese control over Hollywood, they were like, ironically, when you say, well, this is a movie about China taking over the U.S., when China can get Hollywood to scrub all references to China in their film Red Dawn and replace them with North Korea, you can see, ironically, maybe the Chinese have taken over America and the West, and this is what we're fighting against when it comes to stuff like this. So, back to this article. This is just how anti-art Hollywood has become in its effort to suck up to a government currently engaged in human rights abuses on par with Hitler. That's right, for people out there that think this is too much, Hitler had concentration camps. He was bad, punch a Nazi. Well, China has concentration camps. They're currently putting between 1 and 3 million Muslim Uyghurs in there. That's a distinct Muslim population in China of Chinese Muslims. And because China as a state, as a communist dictatorship, means there should be no religion above the state. No religion above the state, no people above the state. The state is God. They're trying to crack down on religion. They're cracking down on Christianity. They're not letting Christians meet. They're replacing the Ten Commandments with quotes from President Xi of China. And so instead of the Ten Commandments, around for thousands of years, now they've got President Xi quotes, and you're supposed to worship that. And in these concentration camps in China, they are taking the Muslim Uyghurs, they are abusing them, torturing them, raping them, and they are forcing them to denounce their own religion as part of this re-education. So if you think that China's not as bad as Hitler, well, that's on par with what Hitler did when it comes to slave labor camps with the Jews. Plus, they've got slave labor there. Plus, they've got live organ harvesting, where if you're the right blood type and they check you and they're like, oh, you know what? There's some rich guy that might need a kidney, right? And we want it fresh, so we'll take it out of you while you're alive, sew you back up, put it in a box, ship it to that guy. Maybe he'll need it. Maybe he needs it now, or maybe he'll need it in a few years. But since we got you, this is what they do there. And this is similar to Hitler's experiments with Joseph Mengele, the sort of crazy doctor that used to do all sorts of live medical experiments on prisoners. So this is Hitlerian, and it is going on right now as I speak or as you listen. And so for the people out there that are concerned about human rights, you can't be hypocrites and freak out. Over somebody might be a Nazi or some white guy wearing a red MAGA hat is the worst thing in the world, and then not freak out over China, because that's not universal principles, right? There's something practical there in terms of picking on people where you can pick on them and doing it for the groupthink and the gram or the whatever, but it's not universal principles, and that's what people should really be aiming to have. So. Back to the article. Forget about China's past. Forget about Mao and year zero and 45 million deaths. As I write this, the Chinese government is using appalling violence to repress its own people and not just the Hong Kong protesters. And there's a hyperlink to that article. I've seen many like it. China, like Cuba, is a massive prison, a giant concentration camp. And Hollywood does not care because Hollywood is, above all, insatiably greedy. If Hollywood wants to access China's massive movie-going public to thousands and thousands of movie screens, China forces Hollywood to toe the line, lick its boots, censor itself, and worst of all, depict the Chinese government as heroic and noble, which is no different than depicting the Nazis as heroic and noble. And that's why I said, stop the new Nazis. Right? These are the new Nazis when it comes to the Chinese government, communist government. Now, I'm not saying the Chinese people. If you want to see what the Chinese people can do with freedom, look at Hong Kong. Bunch of nice, hard-working people, kicking butt, making a great culture for themselves. That's the Chinese under democracy and capitalism. But the Chinese under communism, this is what they do. Just like Germans under Hitler. Germans weren't bad people, but under Hitler, that's what you do. Same thing with communist China. And it says here, and we are not just talking about the movies Hollywood wants to distribute in China. You remember that Red Dawn remake I was just talking about? It never left the country. Red Dawn wasn't censored and twisted into something laughable because Hollywood wanted to distribute it in China. Even though there was no foreign distribution whatsoever, even though it was only produced for American consumption only, it was still censored so it wouldn't offend the Chinese government. And this is part of the propaganda, right? Part of the propaganda is not just pro-China, yes, pro-China, yes. Part of the propaganda is censoring any anti-China criticism. So even though Red Dawn, a movie that was shot to be a what if the Chinese invaded America and Americans had to fight back, and that was replaced with North Korea. Even though that wasn't going to be shown in China, understandably, the Chinese still don't want anti-China propaganda in America because it makes it hard for America or the West in general to resist the Chinese takeover. If you got regular stories about how bad China was and communist China is, then it'd be really hard for them to take over or the globalist super rich people behind them pushing China to be the new role model for the world with their China 2030 plan, their Belt and Road Initiative of international investment in trade and travel, and others. Because in the next 10 years, they're supposed to be running the world, they don't want to warn people about how bad the Chinese Communist government is. And so that's partly what this is. So even though Red Dawn was never going to be shown in China, they were like, even if you only show it to Americans, you still cannot have China be bad guy in that movie, right? So that's what happened. So Nolte writes, this was a key moment for Hollywood. This was back in 2011. So imagine 8+ years of censorship since then. This was back in 2011 when the film industry was desperate to gain admission to all those Chinese screens. When the film industry was sniveling and groveling to its Chinese masters purely out of greed. Here's what happened. The Chinese government leveraged Hollywood's desperation to gain a frightening amount of control over all of Hollywood's content. The Red Chinese, these mass-murdering fiends, now have veto power over America's greatest art form. Yeah, the history of movies. We all love at least some movies, or at least almost all of us love at least some movies. Red China is now controlling that. And so for people out there, it's important to wake your neighbors to this. Because your neighbors will be like, oh, I want to go see a movie, want to go see a movie, want to go see a movie. Oh, Hollywood says this, Hollywood does that. Oh, my life is so boring. Celebrities are so cool. You got to warn them about this because this is bigger than that. And if incrementally they can have less and less trust in Hollywood, less and less faith in their versions of history, less and less faith in the crazy pronunciations of their celebrities, then that'll all have a positive effect, right? So instead of being brainwashed by 10 Hollywood movies a month, maybe you get that down to 3, 4, 5. Maybe that cuts down to 1 or 2. Maybe you find alternative sources of information and entertainment. Maybe you support creators with more of a conscience, right? So there's a ton of competition these days for the entertainment dollar. So this is really important to kind of push back against Hollywood. And it says here, and it is not just the movies. Because of all this consolidation over the past 30 years, because big companies continue to get bigger and bigger as they gobble up other companies, the very same multinationals that own the movie business also own the television and news business. That's why we so rarely hear bad things about China. You're like, well, if China's as bad as Hitler, why isn't the media covering it? Hey, the media didn't cover Hitler for a long time either. In fact, Hitler was Time Magazine's Man of the Year in the late 1930s. It wasn't until 1941 when Pearl Harbor was attacked and the U.S. went into World War II from 1941-42 until 45. That's when the real anti-Hitler backlash came. So if the media wants to, they will invent a Hitler. They will suddenly say Saddam Hussein is like Hitler, or Gaddafi in Libya is like Hitler, or Assad in Syria is like Hitler. They'll suddenly invent a Hitler. And they'll say, this guy's really bad, right? And they may not be perfect. There may be some good and bad qualities to some of those leaders and dictatorships. But when it comes to the actual ongoing Hitlerian regime in communist China, there is Chinese-run silence because of their investments and control when it comes to the media in the West. So, and Breitbart says here, John Nolte says here, not only do the Chinese have control over the content of our movies, that control also sends television and news media. These massive multinational companies don't allow their TV shows or news outlets to expose or criticize China's human rights abuses out of the fear that China will retaliate against its film product. Listen, you cannot even begin to count how this censorship damages our movies and television shows, because most of that censorship is what we don't see, which is anything that might offend China's merciless censors. Didn't you find it odd how the 30th anniversary of Tiananmen Square was almost completely ignored? Where was the big Oscar bait movie? In a moral world, that would be in theaters right now. Yeah, there have been lots of Chinese dissidents that have helped get the word out about China. And you would have, just like you had the movie Schindler's List that came out of Hollywood, that talked about how a German guy named Schindler made a list of a bunch of Jews that he saved from Hitler in World War II. It's like, great, heroic story, you know, could deserve a movie, sure, why not? But what about today? What about the modern day Schindler's List or Shenzhen's List about a Chinese dissident doing the same thing, right? That's not something they'll show you. And so it says here, those of you wondering why movies have become so bland and sexless should know that it's not just the woke tards removing all the sexy fun from the big and small screen. It is also a prudish Chinese government. And it's true, in all the woke culture and the politically correct culture, China was very much in favor of Nike standing behind Colin Kaepernick when it came to Colin Kaepernick protesting against America and against police brutality and against the national anthem and the flag, starting that off at National Football League games and then having other NFL players copy it. China and the Chinese sort of state-run media was for that. This is great, even though it's tough. Nike's taking a stand. The black man's been put down by the evil American government. You know, it's a fantastic move by Nike to support Kaepernick and people fighting for freedom. But then, when it comes to the NBA and a random general manager tweeting support for Hong Kong, no, shouldn't do that. Do not interfere in domestic affairs of China. Do not interfere with internal affairs. Do not interfere with China's sovereignty. It's whoa, wait a second. So China supports Americans protesting against a lack of freedom in America. But if Americans try and protest Chinese in Hong Kong fighting for their freedom, China's government doesn't like that, right? And so it's not just the woke tards, the woke people, on Twitter and so on. They're actually doing the work of the Chinese government. And when it comes to social media and woke culture and Twitter mobs and so on, a lot of that could be engineered, right? Social media, studies show, reduces your attention span, makes you feel more depressed. We are communicating using less and less words in shorter and shorter sentence fragments, more and more emojis. So you're not as much you, and you're not dealing with as much someone else through this medium of communication. Plus, there's something called sock puppets. They were run by the U.S. military. Articles going back to 2010, 2011, 2012, around there, when the word got out and a bunch of people wrote about it, saying the U.S. military and others have a guy at a computer, and he's got like 10 different computers in front of him. And this guy runs 10 different accounts to spread pro-American propaganda, to counter disinformation, and for other reasons. And there are others that can do stuff like this with a setup like that. So when it comes to the people freaking out for no reason on Twitter, or the people arguing, or massive outrage mobs, or even people communicating online with others online, it's very possible you could be talking to robots. Robots. Managed by people, but a guy running 10 different robot programs on 10 different computers in front of him to sort of, this is it, this is that, blah, 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 okay? Because especially if you look at Instagram and so on, here's a bunch of fire emojis, happy face emojis, whatever emojis. You may not be going back and forth with people. And as part of that process, we may be getting less and less people-like. So it's good to fight against that. And I bring this up in the context of China, is to say, look, China would really love it if there was a bunch of domestic confusion and rebellion in the West against Western governments who they're trying to take down and compete with for the 21st century. So don't just think that there's a bunch of normal people out there freaking out like crazy. Normal people don't have to freak out like crazy. Normal people can be like, oh my goodness, that movie sucked. Yeah, it wasn't that great, but blah, blah, blah. Well, you go back and forth, and then you don't have to feel as bad about an experience that you just had. But on social media, you're encouraged just to feel bad, and then becomes competition to see who can feel worse. So you've got the bitchiest, snarkiest, bitchiest blurts bitching about what a mess they are, or what about a mess, or about what a mess something is, or both. And that competition creates an artificial sense that people are more messed up than they are, and that's normal, and that's destabilizing. So don't just think it's woke people that are like, well, you can't have fun movies anymore. You can't have cool guys, hot girls, cute kids. You can't have, badass, manly men like Thor and sweet, beautiful girls, loving it. Instead, you've got to have 5 foot tall, 95-pound Natalie Portman as Thor. And you've got to have dudes that are just kind of dumb douchebags, stumbling over themselves, right? That's part of this is backed by subversive Chinese elements, and this article and many other sources kind of explains and proves that. So back to this article. Unlike the woketards, though, China has actual leverage, financial leverage, which is all Hollywood cares about. If China wanted every movie to be as sexually provocative as Basic Instinct, that's what would happen. But it's not just what we don't see. Again and again, we have watched Hollywood openly smooch Chi-Com ass. The Big Disaster epic 2012 portrayed the Chinese government as humanity's literal saviors. Right? So the Chinese government saved the world in 2012 as part of that movie. Alfonso Cuarón laid some love on the Chinese in Gravity by inventing a space station they do not have. And there's a shot of Sandra Bullock in Gravity here. So it's not even like there's any balance. It's not even like, well, the Chinese do some bad things, but there's some good people who live there and they've got a beautiful culture, several thousand years old. It's like, no. We are going to make China the hero in major Hollywood movies. And back to more examples. While the book World War Z depicted the zombie plague as having begun at the hands of an incompetent and corrupt Chinese government, the movie moved the origin story to North Korea. Right? So it wasn't even, they had to change it. It's like the book World War Z, about a zombie outbreak that takes over the world, and Brad Pitt tries to find the cure to save it. It started in a Chinese lab, corrupt Chinese lab, doing experiments on people and so on. And all of a sudden, they can't say that. Okay, fine, North Korea. We can all pick on North Korea. What can North Korea do? Does North Korea have billions invested here? Do we have billions invested in North Korea? No? Okay, pick on North Korea. Why not? They're crazy. That guy's crazy. Could happen, right? Transformers 2 set much of its actions in the gleaming and modern and pristine city of Shanghai. No squalor there. And so when they show Transformers 2 taking place in Shanghai, it's a beautiful, perfect, magical city, not lots of slave labor and beggars and dead bodies on the streets that everyone else ignores because you're taught not to care about people as much as the state. Just think of yourself, blah, blah, blah. And when that's, some of the reality of what's going on the streets in China, based on the word that's gotten out. And back to the article, it says here, the upcoming Top Gun Maverick is so concerned with offending its Chinese masters. Tom Cruise's iconic flight jacket was stripped of its Japanese and Taiwanese flags. And on and on and on, 3 more hyperlinks to more examples. And it's true, you saw this. There was a trailer for the new Top Gun film starring Tom Cruise. And in the initial trailer, he had his Navy pilot flight jacket. And on that, there was some patches, including Japanese and Taiwanese flags, because the U.S. has a relationship with them. They've got bases in Japan. They've got a relationship with Taiwan, and so on. And the Chinese government said, digitally censor those out, because they are offending us. It's like, wait a minute. We're not even talking about China. We're talking about 2 different countries, Japan and Taiwan, and their flags. China's like, no. Not because you say nothing bad about China, because you say something good about people China doesn't like. Not allowed to do that either. So that's like, whoa, that's crazy. And it says here, and for those of you who would like to see more homosexual characters in movies, the problem is not stuffy right-wing Christians, it's China. So why does Hollywood get a pass for completely retooling its entire industry to appease the Chinese for offenses that make the NBA's recent PR disaster look like a stubbed toe? Well, Hollywood is run by hardcore leftists, and the NBA is a male institution. Silicon Valley is even worse than Hollywood. Google actively participates in China's information repression of its own people, and no one cares because Silicon Valley is also a left-wing institution. The outrage at the NBA is not principled, it's just another left-wing attack against masculinity. And you can follow John Nolte on Twitter and on Facebook. And I'll put a link to this article below. So yeah, and it's true because when you see, Hollywood or the NBA for that matter, and you see the controversy, you'll get somebody like James Harden, former MVP of the league, came in second last year, one of the top 5-10 players in the NBA. And he comes out there and as part of this apology for the controversy around China and the pro-Hong Kong protesters tweet, he says, oh, we love the Chinese people. They show us the most important love. We come over here, they're great. We love everything about China. It's like, wait a minute. That's the exact opposite of what a man with principles is supposed to do when it comes to this, right? Defend free speech, defend your general manager, Daryl Morey, defend the right to condemn bad actions by different parties, right? But instead, nope, total cuckery. And that's ultimately what a lot of this is about. So, as I said, the title of this video is China Runs Hollywood. Learn and pass it on to save your neighbors from the new Nazis. This is both online information war with social media and vlogs, podcasts, and so on, comments. But beyond typing to strangers, and especially in increasingly censored digital ghettos, got to win the offline information war too. You promote be nice, everybody likes it. These days people are acting too rude and sketchy to be nice to each other, talk to each other comfortably. It makes us easier to control. So you promote nice ladies and gents teaching kids to be. Nobody hates that. Promote be polite. Everybody likes it. And then you have more empowered people who can communicate better. And then the usual meetings, meet with people where you live, get together, look each other in the eye, have good cathartic conversations about this stuff. Meet and greet tables, a table, posters, flyers set up there just where you live in a major busy area. Have people come up to you, be polite patriots, engaging with people in a consensual way, not just screaming and ranting or whatever protest style. And posters and flyers. You can slap those up, leave them at businesses, leave them on car windshields. Get the word out about this issue and many other issues where you live so you can get people thinking, especially when the media makes it hot to talk about something, and we're all supposed to. You can give people different information to contribute to that conversation in a more productive and positive way. So anyway, there you have it. With respect to this channel and vlog, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, get in touch with any questions or answers or ideas to work together, or financially support the Man for War's efforts. Or if you want to have a conversation beyond just the commenting below, I wouldn't mind having short conversations, either audio only, anonymously, or whatever, about these things, to have a healthier dialogue about these things than the typical sort of 3, 4, 5 word blurt that's often kind of left different places. And that often might be something encouraged by Chinese and other sort of actors to encourage us to speak less, as opposed to in full sentences and paragraphs with fully formed, unique thoughts like unique individuals should have. So that's something that I'd like to sort of engage in with people if they're up for it. Otherwise, Black Krishna or BK from manforwars.com. Hope this helps, and I'll talk to you soon. Cheers.